Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto this week, the political power play between two women in cannabis in Massachusetts has been settled. Shannon O'Brien is back in charge at the Cannabis Control Commission. We've got reaction from the Bay State.
It's not on paper because she wasn't fired for trying to help some licensees, but what the infighting was allegedly about is that she wanted to do things at the commission that other people there didn't want done.
And Texas holds two special sessions in their legislature and still can't come up with an agreement about what to do with the THC-infused hemp products. So nothing has changed in the Lone Star State for now. Plus, the battle over rescheduling cannabis heats up in Washington, D.C., now pitting two Trump confidants on either side. And the smallest state in the U.S., Delaware, delivers $7 million in sales in the first month of adult use. But their governor vetoes plans for loosening zoning requirements. And another sign of normalization when the NCAA and a German soccer team accept cannabis company sponsorships. All that and coast-to-coast reports on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly show documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition. I'm Alaina Pinto. Over the past 2 years in Massachusetts, two powerful political figures in the cannabis regulatory world in the Bay State have been in a court battle, and that was settled this week. The two women are State Treasurer Deborah Goldberg and the woman she appointed to lead the Cannabis Control Commission, Shannon O'Brien. In September of 2023, Goldberg suspended O'Brien after accusations about her misconduct reached her office. A year later, she fired O'Brien. Then, a lawsuit over wrongful termination was filed by O'Brien. This week, O'Brien was vindicated. A court ordered to restore her position as the head of the CCC, and she is entitled to back pay. With more on this story, here's Curtis Emery with our Bay State Cannabis Report.
My name's Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Yes, big news here in Massachusetts as the CCC is headed for another major shakeup. This time it's the reinstatement of Shannon O'Brien. However, Deborah Goldberg has filed another motion which seeks to postpone her return to this position. That appeal has been recognized. Now, O'Brien was planning on returning to office next week or this week, hoping to oversee the September 11th meeting. However, with this new appeal, it looks like she'll have to wait another 10 days, which will probably push her off past that mark. She's still slotted to return to the CCC, but should be interesting to see how this continues to play out as the legal battle continues. Another continuing story here out of Massachusetts, the Attorney General has allowed two ballot initiatives here in the state which aim to end or crush adult use sales here in Massachusetts. Now, this has been some news in the state over the past month, and when this first came out, it might have seemed as it was overblown for these initiatives need a certain amount of signatures just to make it onto the ballot in such an effective way. Now the Attorney General is saying that these initiatives, which seek to end adult sales here in Massachusetts, can start collecting votes to eventually put on the ballot. Now, they have a long way to go to even get close to the ballot, but with this okay from the Attorney General's office, if they've got 1 foot past the starting line at least. However, got to assume that it's not going to get enough traction to make any sort of legal lasting effect here in Massachusetts. I've been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report, Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Good job as always, Curtis. Appreciate it. Whenever anything happens in the Massachusetts cannabis scene, I go to the number one source. He is Chris Faraone. He publishes the Talking Joints Memo every week. It's must reading if you are in the Bay State. Chris, thank you so much for joining us on short notice. I really do appreciate that.
My pleasure. Lots going on. We have to work through the weekends these days. There's that much going on.
Is there a weekend? I don't remember when the weekends. Just Okay. So big news in Massachusetts this week that the two political figures that have been, I don't want to say dominating the headlines, but it's been a nice sideshow, if you will, with Shannon O'Brien, who was the commissioner, resigned, got fired, went to court, and now she's been vindicated in court. What's your reaction? How much of a big factor is this on the industry, these two women going at it?
Well, first, I just want to clarify that she didn't resign. She got suspended first. So, and I think you put it well that it's kind of a side story, but it does encompass so many of these other stories. It's actually it's hard enough for me to write a cover when even though I'm writing just tons of coverage and I don't have to always lump everything in. This is why it gets a little dicey when the major media organizations do. They start to dip their toe in and then everything's related. So I would say it's very consequential. And of course, we're talking about Treasurer Deb Goldberg and I don't know what we're calling her, former CCC chair, current CCC chair, Shannon O'Brien. So, of course, this settlement comes after 2 years. I call it a September story. September 2023, O'Brien's appointed. September 2020, or no, go back. 2022, she's appointed. September 2023, she is suspended. September 2024, full year later, officially fired. And here we are a year later, and the judge finally comes out with a decision. Now, the decision, to be clear, doesn't say that Shannon O'Brien didn't do all of most of the things she was accused of. These little kind of, not racial epithets, but passive aggressive stuff, or however you want to characterize them. But they don't. What the judge is basically saying is they don't constitute gross misconduct, right? So my reaction is it kind of makes sense. But one of the other things going on here that people really have to understand is that it's not on paper because she wasn't fired for trying to help some licensees, but what the infighting was allegedly about is that she wanted to do things at the commission that other people there didn't want done. Now, I have to stress that there are many sides to this story. It's not just O'Brien versus Goldberg. There are all these other players. There's former executive director Sean Collins, who hasn't said much. And there's also Cedric Sinclair, who had, I think, a few different roles there. And even though he was on the other side of this situation, and from what I understand, really, did not get along with O'Brien, I believe people check out Worcester Business Journal. They had an article. Sinclair, you could say, was also vindicated recently by a decision to get some of his back pay. So everyone's right, everyone's wrong. And as I said in a live stream myself recently, is this good or bad? Depends on who you are. You're a reporter like me. There's always stuff going on to cover. I guess it's good. Then again, I don't like to see the industry suffer at all. Some people would argue that the Cannabis Control Commission has been sidetracked by a lot of this. They've met in tons of executive sessions, it's lawyers, it's costing money. At the same time, the CCC manages to get some stuff done. It hasn't stopped everything in its tracks.
If it seems like we've been covering the political battle in Texas over the hemp ban bill every week, you are right. The governor, Greg Abbott, and the lieutenant governor, Dan Patrick, are on opposite sides of the issue, and two special sessions were called over the summer. The head of the Senate in Texas is Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who wants a total ban on hemp products. This week, his Senate passed another hemp ban bill, but the governor already vetoed that once. So these special sessions were supposed to help get his legislature to come up with regulations that would allow the billion-dollar industry to survive. The debate in the House during the second session could not come up with an option. So that second session expired this week. That means there is no change to the laws in Texas, which allows the hemp industry a reprieve. This week, our hemp reporter was in Washington, D.C., working to fight the federal movement to stop a complete hemp ban. Here's Kerry Hinkle with our hemp report this week from our nation's capital.
Hi there, this is Kerry Hinkle from Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, coming to you live from Capitol Hill, talking all things hemp in our nation's capital. This week we're here in conjunction with the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, the WSWA, the NBWA, and several other associations that are here to talk about the need to regulate rather than prohibit hemp products. You may know that Andy Harris from Maryland is currently leading an effort that would, in the House Agriculture Appropriations Bill, ban all hemp products that contain any quantifiable amounts of THC. Well, part of what our mission today here has been is to circulate a letter being led by Congressman Jamie Comer of Kentucky, who is the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, that would look to strip that language. And you may remember a similar effort happened in July where Mitch McConnell tried to ban these products via the Senate Agriculture Appropriations Bill, and yet that language was stripped thanks in part to Senator Rand Paul. And so our trip today in D.C. Included dozens and dozens of meetings with members of Congress who have signed on to the letter now from states like Colorado, Texas, Indiana, and Kentucky, among others, that look to, again, strip that language and instead look for regulation. And at the same time that we are looking to strip the ban language, we are now working with Congressman Morgan Griffith from Virginia on a regulatory pathway. So it is important that he is in a position on energy and commerce, which is the jurisdiction, the committee of jurisdiction over the FDA, that would look to put in some sensible guidelines like truth in labeling, good manufacturing standards, and only sell these products to adults. And so rather than have one option of a complete free market like we have now, where bad products can end up in the hands of kids, or some options on this product, on this industry, would be to completely ban all products, we're pleased to work with Congress and offer them a third solution, which is sensible guidelines at the federal level that still keep intact states' rights to regulate these products more stringently or not. So again, Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp coming to you live from Washington, D.C.
One more note from Texas. On that same weekend that Governor Abbott vetoed the first hemp ban bill, he did sign a bill that allows the medical cannabis industry to expand. That law went into effect this past week on September 1st. House Bill 46 expands the Texas Compassionate Use Program to include more qualifying conditions, including chronic pain, Crohn's disease, traumatic brain injury, and more. The law will also expand the number of licensed medical dispensaries from 3 to 15, which still seems small considering the size of the state. But the new law also puts a 10 milligram limit on the dosing, and doctors can prescribe a 90-day supply to their patients. So at least there's some progress in Texas. But now let's check in on Arizona with Karen Black.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Arizona's hemp industry just scored a temporary win in court, and the fate of popular hemp-based THC products like Delta 8 is hanging by a thread. The State Court of Appeals hit pause on a crackdown that banned the sale of consumable hemp products outside licensed dispensaries, at least for now, while the legal fight continues. Hundreds of businesses across Arizona that sell gummies, vapes, and drinks containing intoxicating hemp-derived cannabinoids are watching closely. Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays argues these products should only be sold through licensed cannabis dispensaries, but hemp advocates say the products are legal federally and are vital to small businesses. The legal limbo is stirring up plenty of uncertainty while everyone waits for lawmakers to sort things out. A bill to clarify the rules is still pending at the Capitol. That means, for the time being, sales outside of dispensaries are on hold but not officially dead, so expect this battle over hemp-derived THC to keep making headlines as we head into the fall. Even with all the regulatory headaches and sales sliding a bit statewide, Arizona is still a hotspot for cannabis expansion. Trulieve, one of the biggest operators here in the Grand Canyon State, just announced they'll open a new dispensary in Bisbee, which is in Cochise County, on September 12th. This marks their 22nd location in Arizona and expands their reach to 16 cities statewide. At the same time, Colorado's Green Dot Labs, famous for their small batch concentrates and premium genetics, is launching in the Arizona market. These moves show MSOs and out-of-state brands see major long-term potential here, even as sales numbers have been trending down. So while the industry navigates court battles and evolving laws, investment and new business keep rolling in with more options for Arizona consumers just around the corner. That's all. for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And now let's take a look at federal reform of cannabis laws. It's now been more than a few weeks since President Trump mentioned rescheduling would be considered. That delay has allowed the growing prohibitionist movement to galvanize their support to fight the rescheduling of cannabis. It has also allowed 40 members of Congress to sign on to support and sponsor the MORE Act. That act paves the way for legalization and descheduling of cannabis, which is much preferred by the industry. Two of President Trump's trusted insiders weighed in with their opinions on the rescheduling movement over the last week. Dr. Ben Carson, the former director of Health and Human Services during President Trump's first term, is against rescheduling. He blames cannabis in legal adult use states with an increase in crime. And now that probably has more to do with the all cash industry than overuse or abuse of the plant medicine. But Carson's quote that was shared by the Fox network said, quote, "I urge caution when we consider such sweeping changes. The intent may be compassionate, but the consequences are certainly harmful. As someone who has spent decades caring for the health and well-being of families across America, I have seen firsthand how substance abuse devastates lives and communities," unquote. Kellyanne Conway is another former member of President Trump's inner circle of advisors left over from his first administration, who is actually for cannabis rescheduling. Florida Republican Brian Mast, who is a member of the Cannabis Caucus, said in an interview this week with Marijuana Moment that she is much in Trump's circle of people, and rescheduling is something she's been moving forward with this administration as well. For some time, she's been a part of the inner circle there. You know, let's say the biggest champion of that. So I think Kellyanne is making a difference as well, unquote. There's a long tradition in the state of Michigan that has served as an opportunity to wave the flag for the pro-cannabis movement in that now legal adult use state. It's called the Mackinac Bridge Walk. If you don't know your U.S. geography, Michigan has two peninsulas, with the Great Lakes of Michigan on one side and Lake Huron on the other. Once a year on Labor Day weekend, citizens are allowed to walk the 5-mile bridge that connects the Upper Peninsula to the Lower Michigan. This is the 67th year of the Mackinac Bridge Walk, which draws thousands of participants to walk the longest suspension bridge in the Western Hemisphere. Our Michigan reporter, Amie Carter, was there, and now her report is sponsored by Wally's Wonder World of customizable humidors.
This is mold on wheat bread. This is mold on weed. And this is what this Wonder World plant is supposed to look like. Do you want to make sure this never happens to your precious flower? Check out the homemade humidors by Fenton, Michigan craftsman Gregory Johnson. Each humidor can hold 1 ounce of your stash, and it comes with a Boveda humidity pack. You care about your flower, so protect it inside a humidor made with American-grown maple, cherry, or sapele wood. Check out their website at wallyswonderworld.com. There, you'll find the famous award-winning Hakuna Matata No Worries Humidor. You'll also find a variety of humidors with different designs. They even customize accessories like doobie tubes, grinders, and even a classic roach clip from the 70s. Treat your stash with class with a custom homemade humidor from wallyswonderworld.com, and never worry about moldy weed again.
Amie Carter here, bringing you the latest green news in Michigan for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Let's light up this report. First up, a little recall buzz for you. Last week, we told you about exclusive brands in Ann Arbor getting a little hazy with their Pineapple Jealousy vape carts. Well, now there's a statewide recall on about 6,000 of them because they were found to contain MCT oil. It's like a bad trip for your vape. Totally banned since last year. So if you've got one, be sure to check the batch number and get it out of your stash. In other news, SkyMint is finally seeing some daylight after a long, messy receivership. After 2.5 years of being in the weeds, the company has new Canadian owners who say they're bringing it back into the green. And a massive shout out to everyone who came out to the Zahra Abbas Memorial Bridge Walk. The energy was incredible. So many came together for both the Mackinac Bridge picnic and the walk. It was a beautiful day of advocacy and fellowship with hundreds of people stopping to show their support. It's a powerful reminder that our community is growing stronger and we're not afraid to push the boundaries to get our message out there. To hear about the journey of how this amazing event got started, here's one of its key organizers, Ryan Bringold.
We are here to celebrate all our brothers and sisters, not just the ones on the photo, but all our brothers and sisters that can't be here today. We all have personal relationships with some of those people, and we miss them. We think about them all the time. We walk for their memory and their hard work today. When you're out and about and people ask you about your shirts, tell them who you are, be proud, enjoy, and we'll see you back here for snacks in about 2 hours. Have a great walk!
Thanks, Ryan. On the legal front, a Warren judge has sparked a new conversation about cannabis laws. A judge out of the 37th District Court has ruled that Michigan Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act, the MRTMA, takes precedence over the state's public health code. The ruling came in a case where a pair was charged with marijuana possession within 1,000 feet of a school under the public health code. However, the MRTMA more recently took effect in 2019. It only prohibits possession on school grounds. This ruling highlights the ongoing legal complexities of cannabis regulation in Michigan. Finally, mark your calendars because the Michigan Weedsters annual harvest rally is going down September 9th at the Capitol in Lansing. It's all about shaping our industry, protecting our rights to grow at home, and supporting local businesses against corporate greed. We will have live music, inspiring speakers, and World 3 judges will be there handing out trophies for the annual Capitol Bowl competition. I'm Amie Carter with Michigan Weedsters, and that's your Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The Michigan Report is sponsored by Wally'sWonderworld.com.
That'll do it for the A Block this week. There's plenty more reports from different states, but when we come back, we will check with the reform movement from across the pond in the UK with Dave Barton. Plus, later, we'll check out a cannabis-friendly festival in Minnesota. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break.
Your cannabis business could be overpaying by hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal income taxes because of one simple assumption that you're making about your accountant. A dispensary owner in Colorado called me frustrated as hell. He'd been working with the same accountant for 3 years. His accountant said, "What's 471C?" Here's what the ignorance of that accountant was costing this business owner. $180,000 every single year for 3 years. 471C has been around since 2017. We're talking about an 8-year-old tax provision that many cannabis CPAs don't fully understand. 471C is one of the most complex and highly debated tax strategies in the cannabis industry. If you want to make sure you're not leaving any money on the table, I'm offering free 471C reviews this month. Link in the description.
Accounting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
If you want to make history, if you want to be part of history, if you want to say you helped legalize marijuana in America, now is the time to join us.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the B Block, or second section of our show. I'm Alaina Pinto. With the US market imploding thanks to the constant delays for rescheduling in this country, Europe is getting more and more attention by US-based investors and operators. The country of Switzerland is in the middle of a public comment period on the proposals in place to become the first European country to create a fully regulated legal adult use sales market. One of the interesting things included in this country's proposed rules is the ban on all vertical operations. There will be separate licenses for growers, manufacturers, and retailers. There is also a nationwide cap of 5 grams of THC in all products. And right now, that country is in the middle of that 3-month public comment period, and they are still quite a few months away from launch. They also need to establish a seed-to-sale tracking system before they even think about their opening day. But now, let's check in on what is going on in England with Dave Barton.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermador with your UK Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A new study from the University of Bath finds that those who use cannabis to self-medicate are apparently at greater risk of paranoia than recreational users. Following a 3-year study and what's said to be the largest survey into cannabis with nearly 3,400 current and former users participating, researchers have published 2 reports. The first considers the implications of self-medicating and recreational cannabis use, while the second looks at the relationship between cannabis and childhood trauma. In both cases, results show that those self-medicating are more susceptible to paranoia. However, it's not made clear if those surveys were medical cannabis patients with a CBPM prescription, black market product consumers, or a mixture of both. Neither is it explicitly stated if any participants had received advice from a medical professional with cannabis-specific expertise. Hardly surprising considering the study was funded by the Medical Research Council of the UK. Can anyone else smell the bullshit here? That's all for this week's UK report. I'm Dave Barton from Thermador, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debi Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast News Report. So what we have in Canada this week is in Alaina Pinto, we have the Indigenous Cannabis Conference, which will be held from September 14th to 16th of 2025. This is going to be bringing together Indigenous leaders, innovators, as well as policymakers when it comes to discussing cannabis in the entrepreneurship and economic state. And it's also going to be able to provide some great information and some applications for the participants that had attended. Next, what we have is Emblem's Divi infused pre-roll has been recalled due to incorrect labels indicating their THC and CBD content. This is something where over 4,000 pieces have been recalled. And with that being said, we hope that not only everybody has a safe consumption, especially if they had consumed it, but if they haven't, please return it to your local store in order to make sure that they give you something that is actually going to be the proper THC levels and content. This is Debi Facey with your Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. Peace.
2 more notes from Europe, both from Germany. FC Union Berlin, a German soccer team, is embracing a medical cannabis company as its main sponsor. That new sponsor is Ave Medical, and they have been committed to therapeutic use of high-quality medical cannabis products for years. They're trying to destigmatize cannabis in that European nation by offering an alternative for treatment, especially for those with chronic illnesses. The second news item comes from the political arena, where the new federal drug commissioner, Dr. Henrik Streeck, is calling for stricter regulations of that country's new legal cannabis industry. He thinks that the current home grow rules are unrealistic and that stricter guidelines regarding the smoking of the product are necessary because of the dangers of smoking. Yes, there are still plenty of battles to be waged in order to free the plant in that country. But back here in the US, there has been a huge data breach in Ohio by the Ohio Medical Alliance that may have exposed the medical records of thousands of patients in that state. Christina Brisson has that story and more out of the Buckeye State.
Hi, I'm Christina Brisson with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Recently, Ohio marijuana cars has been charged negligent with a data breach, leaving their database fully exposed and exposing over 950,000 records with social security numbers, medical IDs, health records, and more. Additionally, Circleville is now looking to expand their moratorium to February 2026. I encourage residents out there to get out to those local city council meetings. We got New Albany to open a new dispensary, a new Curaleaf dispensary, now open in Westerville technically, but to serve the New Albany area. That is your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report. I am Christina Brisson with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
A new national health poll on aging conducted by the University of Michigan has concluded that baby boomers and Gen X are fueling the cannabis industry in adult use legal sales. In fact, they are reporting that 1 in 5 people over the age of 50 are using cannabis at least once a month. The poll results report that the top 5 reasons older adults use cannabis are to relax, help with sleep, deal with pain, improve their mental health and mood, and finally, just to enjoy the effects and feel good. One of the most interesting things this poll showed was that 56% of the older adults have discussed their cannabis with their healthcare providers, while 44% have not. Well, now let's check in with Dina Naguib in California.
I'm Dina Naguib, Principal Consultant at Grass Goddess Consulting, here to give you the latest developments in California for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Big news last week out of Sacramento, where 2 bills passed the Senate Appropriations Committee. The first one, AB 8, integrates naturally occurring, non-intoxicating cannabinoids derived from hemp into the regulated cannabis supply chain. Amie O'Gorman Jenkins, the California Cannabis Operators Association's executive director, said the following about the news. Today's vote is a major victory for public health and consumer safety in California. Assembly Bill 8 closes dangerous loopholes that allow untested, unregulated, intoxicating products to be sold online, at gas stations, and in convenience stores, often reaching minors. The second bill, AB 564, would restore the cannabis excise tax from 19% back to 15% as it was prior to July. This bill has been a roller coaster for operators who were hopeful that it would pass before the increase took effect. After looking like the bill might fail completely, another hurdle has now been passed, and there is renewed hope that the excise tax will go back to 15%. It is important to note that this tax applies to medical patients as well as adult use. And O'Gorman Jenkins stated that this increase pushes patients and consumers to the illegal market where products are untested, untracked, and untaxed. I'm Dina Naguib from Grass Goddess Consulting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Kentucky continues to wait for their first harvest, which will be the trigger to launch their medical program sometime before the end of this year. In the meantime, a hemp company in that state that has a line of infused beverages is sponsoring University of Louisville athletics. Cornbread Hemp is the first company that has stepped up and made some history in the so-called bourbon belt of the world in Kentucky. Louisville is proud of their history as the bourbon capital of the world and now is leading the way in THC-infused beverages. Now, let's check in with Jenny Germano in Colorado.
I am Jenny Germano with ICS Consulting. This is the Colorado Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Loveland residents and city leaders are navigating the green frontier as questions swirl around how regulated cannabis businesses will take root in the community. A recent public meeting revealed more questions than answers, especially when it comes to the licensing rules. Loveland voters passed measures 2F and 2H, authorizing medical and retail cannabis businesses and setting a 5% excise tax on sales in the November 5th, 2024 election. But now the city is facing important challenges. How many licenses should be issued? Who qualifies? And how soon can these businesses get open? At a recent public regulation meeting, the community members and business owners turned out in droves. Their questions highlighted the city task of building a new licensing system from scratch. Public officials outlined plans to nail down eligibility requirements, a cap on the number of businesses, the timelines for license rollout, Still, many of those in attendance voiced their concerns. Uncertainty remains about the eligibility rules, application processes, and when operations actually might begin. City staff emphasized that these conversations are part of a broader regulatory framework in the making, aimed at balancing public safety, community standards, and a business opportunity. It's clear this is just the beginning of what promises to be a closely watched, community-centered discussion. Stay tuned for future reporting and updates on Loveland's evolving cannabis licensing process. I am Jenny Germano with ICS Consulting, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One of the newest states to open a legal adult use market for cannabis is one of the smallest states in the country, Delaware. While that little state is on the East Coast, it did over $7 million in sales in their first month. And according to the regulatory agency that tracks all sales in that state, over 50% of the legal buys were flower-based products. That state allowed their existing medical dispensaries to open up for adult use sales, ensuring that people will have access to the plant on day one. All product, of course, has to be grown inside the state borders of Delaware. There are currently 12 dispensaries that were licensed for medical only, but have been allowed to offer adult use sales now. It's not all great news for pro-cannabis enthusiasts in that state. The governor, Matt Meyer, vetoed a law that would have allowed more locations to open dispensaries for adults by easing zoning restrictions, but for now, the laws will stay the same. Next up, Virginia with Joe Parsons.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection by Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 through WV, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Another top Democratic Virginia senator has come out of the cannabis closet, so to speak, to help initiate the adult use market here in the Commonwealth. With the anticipated increases in spending in Virginia that are the result of various policy initiatives by the Trump administration, such as the withdrawal of federal welfare dollars to states, Senator Louise Lucas, a Democrat, said it's time to get serious about alternative revenue, which should include legalizing marijuana. She also said, "We have an inescapable responsibility to generate and create long-term and sustainable source of revenue to safeguard core programs and services." Now, she's joining efforts similar to that of Senator Paul Krizik, another Democratic cannabis freedom fighter, to open the doorways to get the adult use program up and running as soon as possible. The governor's race is the last hurdle left stopping us from a safe and fair market. I, for one, applaud her continued dedication to not only generate revenue, but to keep Virginia moving in the right direction towards adult use freedom. And a special shout out and thank you to my musical guest this week on Coffee Talk. We were discussing the best weed songs and our favorite. I was lucky enough to get the composer and singer of my favorite weed song to come on the show. William G. Kidd from Utah performed my favorite and a few others for a super fun episode. Now, if you want to know what my favorite weed song is, then log on to www.3wb.com and listen to the episode to find out for yourself. Well, that's going to do it for this week from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB in Charlottesville, and reporting for WPCM TV's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
One thing that has been consistent in the fight to end cannabis prohibition is the fact that legal adult use states continue to rake in tax revenue. While there are always cities and towns that opt out of allowing cannabis dispensaries to set up shop in their area, those that do allow the businesses all enjoy the tax revenue driven by sales. According to a report in the Bay Net in Maryland, that total is now $18 million in the second quarter of this year alone. With more from Maryland, here's the enlightened voice, Christopher Bright.
I'm Christopher Bright from the Enlightened Voice. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'll be bringing you the latest cannabis headlines from Maryland. In a significant ruling, a Fourth Circuit panel has upheld Maryland's social equity mandate for its retail cannabis market. The decision rejected a challenge from California resident Justine Jensen, who argued that a licensing requirement favoring applicants who attended certain Maryland universities discriminates against out-of-state residents. The criterion prioritizes those who study at Maryland colleges where at least 40% of the students qualify for Pell Grants aimed at communities disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. The U.S. Circuit Court Judge Deandra Just Benjamin wrote that the rule does not require Maryland residents, as applicants can qualify through online attendance at one of the 6 eligible schools, including Bowie State and Morgan State. The court found no violation of the U.S. Constitution's Dormant Commerce Clause, dismissing Jensen's claim that the policy favors in-state residents. The panel has also noted that Jensen's delay in seeking an injunction weakened her case. Maryland has already issued 205 conditional cannabis licenses, with 16 meeting the Pell Grant criteria. And now we have our content creator of the week. I would like to shine a spotlight on Ashley, aka Smiley, or Canna Girl Live on IG. As an assistant manager of Chester Canna Dispensary, you can always see her smiling face at the York location. She is knowledgeable about their products and makes reels to showcase them. You can also catch her at most of the events under the Chester Canna tent. Follow her on IG at CannaGirl Live, and don't forget to say hi. And that's been this week's Maryland's Cannabis Report. I'm Christopher Bright from the Enlightened Voice, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the B Block, but Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break with a report from Minnesota and one of the first open consumption celebrations in that new adult use state. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
What if we're right? What if all of a sudden they discovered that there is medical use for marijuana and that it is good for you and it's better than alcohol and it's better than opioids and it helps your health? What if we're right? What if they find that out?
Specific cannabinoids have medical value. These are facts.
I'm here today in hopes to assist in removing the demonized stigma of cannabis and the perception that cannabis is just about getting high. The true base of this plant has to be known.
I don't think anybody should ever go to jail for cannabis. Get some medicine, and everybody should have access to it.
This is something which, at the very, very least, is the key to alleviating suffering and extending life for millions of human beings. Right? For returning some kind of balance to our society, and quite possibly of restoring our planet's natural balance as well.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the C Block in the final section of this week's show. One Midwest state that continues to make it more and more difficult to launch a cannabis business is Nebraska. First, it took a series of lawsuits just to ratify the ballot questions that passed last year. Now the Nebraska Medical Cannabis Commission is making more changes to those laws. They are already limiting the number of medical dispensaries, and now they are also putting limits on the amount of licensed doctors can prescribe. And now they are banning all infused edibles. So you can add that to the list of no vaping, no smoking, and you are limited to purchasing 5 milligram tablets. The weird thing is that you can possess up to 5 ounces of the plant medicine. So how are you going to consume it is going to be a real challenge in Nebraska. Krista Eggers is the head of the Nebraskans for Medical Marijuana, and she is outraged by these changes. 71% of voters passed the medical decriminalization question at the ballot box, but like so many other states, prohibitionists continue to slap that democratic process in the face. Next up, let's check in with Tina Tasaka in Nevada and the Tribal Nations Report.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Back in mid-July, I reported on the Omaha Tribe of Nebraska and the fact that they are the first reservation within the state to pass comprehensive regulations for cannabis use. Well, there are some updates to share. The Omaha Tribe of Nebraska, through its Attorney General, John Cartier, is fast-tracking medical cannabis legalization on tribal land, launching a comprehensive regulatory code when the state implementation lags. Cartier cites looming federal budget cuts of over 30% to native programs and high reservation unemployment, about 60%, as key motivators. He's critical of Nebraska's Medical Cannabis Commission, warning of legal uncertainty and compliance costs that threaten to stall access. Under the tribe's plan, licensing, regulation, and patient access are expected to take shape in early next year, pending the setup of tribal rules and a regulatory commission. A Las Vegas man, Elias Ghanem II, 38 years old, was sentenced to 84 months in prison for running a $1.4 million fraud scheme tied to fake cannabis and restaurant investments. From 2018 to 2019, he raised nearly $1 million for a cannabis company and $400,000 for a restaurant venture, but spent the money on luxury homes, jewelry, and personal debts. One victim, a disabled retired officer, lost $280,000. Ghanem pleaded guilty to wire fraud in February of 2025, and on September 5th, 2025, a New York federal judge ordered him to also pay $1.4 million in restitution. Prosecutors called his crimes greedy and cruel. True Harmony Company, LLC, has opened a 250,000 square foot cannabis cultivation glasshouse in White Pine County, Nevada. Using mixed light technology, the facility aims to improve product quality and energy efficiency. With state licenses secured, the first grow cycle is underway. Local leaders support the project for its job creation and economic benefits, while the company stresses sustainability and compliance. That's it for the Nevada highlights and tribal nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And now it's time to take a look at what is going on with the publicly traded stocks in the cannabis space. With valuations crashing and debt coming due next year, the industry continues to operate on hope and promise. If you do get into the sector, you might want to take some motion sickness medication, since these stocks are the most volatile on the market. A perfect example of this is Verano, and Doug Miller takes a look at their wild ride in his High on Wall Street segment.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. MSO Verano's shares have skyrocketed 178% in the past month, fueled by investor hopes of federal reform and a wave of new dispensary openings. In its latest quarter, revenue slipped 9% year over year to $202 million. But here's the bright spot. Gross margins climbed to nearly 56% thanks to cultivation efficiencies in Florida and Illinois. While Verano still posted a small loss of 5 cents per share, it's an improvement from last year. The company's betting on efficiency gains, new dispensaries, and product launches like vape extensions and wellness items to drive growth. But with 100% of its revenue tied to the U.S., Verano remains vulnerable to federal regulatory delays, while rivals like Curaleaf and Aurora diversify abroad. So let's see how the stock chart looks. It's trading around $1.34, and with its recent run-up, it's just pulling back slightly right now. So let it set up and watch for dips and trade smart, lock in those profits, because it's going to be popping soon. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
There's a story emerging in states like Texas, whose lawmakers just can't figure out how to regulate the hemp industry without destroying it. Now, a study out of the University of California at San Diego shows that in states where cannabis is still illegal, they have the largest and most successful hemp-derived Delta-8 sales. And then you have states like Alabama, where they voted to decriminalize the plant medicine and start a medical program 4.5 years ago. Patients in that state are still waiting for their first license to be issued to grow or a dispensary to open. So the battle moves to the courthouse, where there has been more lawsuits filed in that state than licenses granted. Right in the middle of documenting these legal battles is our own Jennifer Boozer Stewart, who continues to bring attention to the injustice and dysfunctional state government in her home state.
I'm Jennifer Boozer Stewart, reporting from Alabama for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. As the process for administrative appeals begins for the Alabama Medical Cannabis Program, Alabama continues to wait indefinitely for the availability of medical cannabis after 4 years of legal battles over integrated facility licenses. Already licensed as a cultivator, Antoine Mordican, founder of Native Black Cultivation, has now harvested 6 crops in the last 2 years and still has no way to sell the plants to make this vital medicine available to the people who will qualify for medical cannabis under the Compassion Act of 2021. He also has no way to make any revenue to sustain his historical operation. His hybrid grow facility costs between $5,000 and $10,000 a month to operate and is now staffed largely by volunteers. With plant materials sitting in freezers awaiting processing, potential patients are desperate for relief and left hanging with no clear idea of when they can even apply for the program. Worries over the threat of having to destroy degraded plants and losing hundreds of thousands of dollars makes this endeavor by Mordican a daunting one. But he remains optimistic that the end of this stalemate is near and the medicine will be available sooner than later once the dispensary appeals process is completed, hopefully in October. Alabama's sick, suffering, and dying patients are still reeling from the impact of HB 445 on the hemp industry, which is the only access they have had to plant medicine for the last 7 years. The issue of legalization is shaping up to be a major motivator of single-issue voting as we get further into the campaign process in remaining 2025 and 2026 elections. Resources such as AlabamaCannabisCoalition.com and Sweet Home Cannabama Radio, hosted by yours truly, are working tirelessly to keep the citizens informed on over 400 candidates' stance on cannabis and hemp in their effort to assist them in their decision in the 2025 and 2026 elections in Alabama. You can go to the ACC website or our Sweet Home Cannabama YouTube page for more information. Reporting from Alabama, I'm Jennifer Boozer Stewart for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Alicia Bellamy with Cannabis Coast to Coast News, here with Dr. Dabney. We're at the Debi Dabbler. It's our second Debi Dabbler here in Minnesota. And what do you think of it?
I think it's quite the spectacle. I think it's the Minnesota State Fair meets cannabis culture. Behind us, there's an adult jumping area. We've got hundreds of vendors selling cannabis products or cannabis-related stuff, tie-dye. There's medieval MMA, so people dressed up in chainmail and armor with swords, beating each other up. There's some BMX jumping happening over there. Food trucks galore. There's Lesco. Several stages of live music happening all the time. Awesome. Yeah, it's been there's been a couple hotbox sessions that have been popping up in an ice house at old parachute flight preschool. It's really probably one of the biggest gatherings of Minnesota cannabis culture. It's really cool how it's expressing itself.
Yeah. I'm Alicia Bellamy for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The relationship between alcohol and cannabis is obvious. Both substances have qualities that get you intoxicated. But what happens when you mix these two products? Many doctors report that the effects of using cannabis prior to drinking alcohol enhances your buzz by 8 times. So it should come as no surprise when you hear the results of a study out of Colorado state that claims that subjects who are under the influence of cannabis before they start drinking will consume significantly less alcohol. Participants in this study were allowed to consume cannabis before being served alcohol, and sure enough, those subjects consumed less alcohol by 25%. Amazingly, they were served drinks every 15 minutes until they refused service. Finally, tonight, there's a new poll about legalization that shows that 65% of Americans think cannabis legalization is a good idea. Emerson College conducted the latest poll, which reinforces the results of some of the other polls about legalization in this country. The last Pew Research poll from the fall of 2024 had 72% in support of legalization. The results of this latest Emerson poll shows that legalization approval has grown by 5% since their last poll on the subject about a year ago. So the battle continues in this country and around the world to end cannabis prohibition, and we will continue to share news of that battle. But that'll do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Consume it responsibly.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Pro Cannabis Media is now WPCM TV, your go-to website for things cannabis. WPCM TV is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news you need.
Amie Carter. This week, she reports from inside the State House in Lansing.
I'm Amie Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And talk shows about all things cannabis.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important.
It all started back in 2018 when Emmy award-winning talk show host Jimmy Young kicked it off with the In the Weeds podcast.
That it's not just any generic paper towel. You do have a brand that you use, right?
Yeah, we live or die by the bounty. I mean...
the quicker picker-upper! I love that!
His mission? Building an army of multimedia journalists and podcast hosts who are documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. Fast forward to today, and we've got the nation's only weekly cannabis coast-to-coast news program with Alaina Pinto.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly production of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto.
Delivering the nation's only TV news-style program. Since June 2021, WPCM TV has racked up over 1.3 million views, with 17 million impressions, and picked up over 16,000 subscribers on YouTube alone. For more information, contact the team at WPCMTV.com